Hey guys, tonight we're going to ride, not at a gallop, not through danger, not across enemy lines, but with the slow, measured patience of someone who knows that the most important part of travel is rest. We're joining a Mongol courier, not the kind from battle legends, but the one who wakes up next to a saddle, yawns before he speaks, and always knows how far it is to the next nap. You probably won't survive this, unless you're secretly one of those people who loves the idea of crossing Central Asia with nothing but a satchel, a schedule, and 7 naps between here and Karakoram. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe roll onto your side, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We're not starting in a palace or a city gate. We're beginning just outside a yurt, the kind that leans a little to one side, its flap tied open with half a knot, as if someone planned to leave but didn't quite make it. There's a saddle outside the entrance, set gently against a worn felt pad. Beside it, a folded blanket, a leather bag tied tight, and a tin cup still warm with yesterday's tea. You recognize the signs. The courier hasn't left yet. He's just stretching. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During the height of the Mongol Empire, a system known as the Yam provided relay stations for imperial couriers. These posts stretched across Asia, from the edge of Europe to China, allowing messages to travel vast distances with surprising speed. But what made the system effective wasn't constant movement. It was reliable, rhythmic rest. You hear a low grunt from inside the yurt. The flap lifts. A man steps out, stretching one arm, then the other. His coat is lined with wool, the sleeves loose. He's not in a hurry, because his role is about continuity, not urgency. Fringe details some couriers were trained to sleep in short intervals throughout the day, not because they were tired, but to keep their minds clear and their reactions even. These weren't deep, snoring sleeps. They were calculated soakings, letting the body settle just enough to renew, then rising without grogginess. He walks past you and checks the horse, still tethered, still dozing, one eye open but uninterested in the world. The courier pats its shoulder. No words, just pressure. He returns to the yurt and lifts a small bundle, dried cheese, tea concentrate, a feather charm tucked inside for luck. Then, without sitting down, he lowers himself onto a mat and rests again, just for 10 more minutes. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. Did Mongol messengers follow a set sleep cycle, or did they sleep purely by instinct and environment? Some historians suggest they planned around the relay system's spacing, sleeping a bit before and after each station. Others believe it was instinctual, tuned by years of exposure to wind, sound, and horse movement. Either way, it worked. This is your journey-style immersion. You sit outside the yurt with your back against the saddle. The air is crisp, but the felt mat is still warm. The courier dozes again. The horse breathes gently nearby. The tea from last night is cold, but smells familiar. And no one asks when you'll leave, because the message will wait. The road will wait, but rest cannot. The light has softened now, thinning across the grassland in long, delicate stripes. You haven't moved, neither has the courier. He's stretched out on his side again, wrapped loosely in a woolen cloak, one hand beneath his head, the other resting lightly on a leather pouch. His horse shifts its weight nearby, but doesn't wander. It's waiting. Or maybe it's just with him. This horse doesn't need a lead rope. It knows this rhythm. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Horses used in the Yam postal relay system were central to its success, and they weren't chosen for beauty or speed alone. Mongol horses were compact, enduring, and trained to navigate terrain more than obey sharp commands. These mounts were rotated at each relay station, but couriers often bonded closely with a core horse or two between major posts, sharing sleep, food, and instinct. You rise slowly and approach the animal. It lowers its head slightly, not in greeting. Exactly, but in tolerance, it's chewing something dry and fibrous. Its mane is tangled but brushed at the edges. A few horsehair braids hold tiny beads, not for fashion, for memory. You reach out, place a hand just behind the withers. The horse doesn't flinch. It's used to people who move slowly. Fringe detail many couriers kept small charms woven into their horses' manes, pieces of their children's clothes, knotted grass from lucky valleys, or feathers that had touched the shoulder of a friend. These weren't superstitions in the dramatic sense. They were quiet anchors, markers of continuity across long stretches of open land. The courier stirs. He doesn't rise, but his eyes open briefly. He blinks once, then lets them close again. It's not time yet. You walk with the horse along a low ridge. The ground rises beneath you in gentle swells, barely enough to change your breath. A few tufts of grass bend with the wind. The road ahead curves out of sight, but no one's chasing it. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. Did couriers sleep better when near their horses? Some suggest that riders and animals developed overlapping rest habits, short intervals of joint stillness, tuned to one another. Others believe the horse was more than transport. It was environment, warmth, sound, the quiet reassurance that one was not truly alone, even when dozing. A courier could feel the horse shift beside him, hear it sigh. This is your journey-style immersion. You and the horse return to the yurt. The courier is sitting up now, cup of tea in hand, steam curling over his nose. He doesn't speak. He hands you a second cup. You sit, legs folded, cloak pulled around your knees. The horse drops to its knees slowly, then lowers itself fully, legs tucked beneath. Now it rests too, and you, warm tea in hand, feel your breathing sink with the slow exhale of an animal that has crossed more distance than you can imagine, and still finds this moment more important than the next one. The tea is warm, but mild, more broth than beverage. It smells faintly of salt and something earthy, like sun-dried herbs crumbled beneath boot soles. The courier holds his cup loosely, thumb tapping once against the rim, not to stir anything, just to feel the rhythm. His saddle rests beside him, untouched, oiled smooth by use and silence. He sets the cup down and pulls from his cloak a thin metal tablet, etched with foreign curves and worn smooth at the corners. This is his paisa. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mongol imperial messengers carried a paisa, a metal tablet issued by the Khan's authority that granted them access to the Yam system. It was both passport and command, a quiet token that instructed officials across the empire to provide food, shelter, and fresh horses. The higher the rank, the more elaborate the tablet, but even the simplest was treated with deep respect. The courier places his paisa on the edge of a low wooden crate. He doesn't polish it, doesn't hide it, just lets it rest in the light. Catching the first flicker of a distant fire through the yurt flap, fringe details some paisa tablets were marked not just with writing, but with shapes, wavy lines for rivers, teeth for mountains. These weren't maps. They were permissions inscribed through symbol, recognizable at a glance by those who couldn't read. One account tells of a village elder who bowed to the paisa before he bowed to the rider. The courier begins to gather his gear, but not to leave. He checks his saddlebags, leather supple, buckles loose, and replaces the tablet inside with care. He untangles a small cloth bundle, dried mutton, fermented milk curds, a lump of coarse salt. Then, unexpectedly, he lies back down. The ritual of readiness was not for departure. It was for rest. Here's your scholarly uncertainty where Pesa tokens, always honored most evidence suggests they were, respected from Mongolia to Persia to Korea. But some local officials feared them, worried about the weight they carried. To deny aid was unthinkable. To offer too much was risky. So the courier's quietness wasn't just courtesy, it was part of the code. You sit beside him again. His breathing has slowed. The saddle now rests as a pillow, still warm from the afternoon sun. He tucks one hand beneath it, not for safety, but for familiarity. This is your journey-style immersion. You hold the paisa briefly. It's heavier than it looks, not with weight, but with authority. You run your finger along the edge, feel the dents from years of road work. Then you return it to the cloth, fold it twice, and place it near his shoulder. The wind has changed. A light rustle lifts through the grass outside, somewhere farther along the road. Another yurt waits. Another rider may already be resting. But here, in this half-lit place, where gear is ready and bodies are still, you realize something simple. The most respected message in the empire could wait a few more minutes, and the paisa would still shine. Evening leans into the yurt now, casting soft blue across the felt walls. A fire has been lit somewhere nearby, its glow diffused through a thin vent at the top of the ceiling dome. You can hear the wind outside, but it doesn't push. It curls and rests, like everything else in this part of the empire. The courier's gear is arrayed neatly beside him, saddle blanket folded square, boots upright, stirrups looped, belt coiled like a snake at rest. Not packed, just placed, because messengers didn't live out of their gear. They lived with it. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mongol imperial couriers followed meticulous routines for managing their equipment. Saddles were placed close by during sleep, not for theft prevention, but for proximity. A messenger's saddle served as seat, bed, storage, and ritual object. Straps were checked twice a day. Gear was laid out in the same order, no matter the landscape. Consistency mattered, not because of rules, but because of endurance. The courier now reaches for his saddle blanket and folds it again, not tighter, just smoother. He places a packet of wool between the folds. Then he places it beside his sleeping mat, just under where his knees will rest. Fringe details some messengers stuffed their saddlebags with aromatic grasses, not to scent their belongings, but to remind themselves where they'd come from. A whiff of river thyme might signal the last station. A trace of dried juniper meant mountain country. These were mental landmarks, stitched into muscle memory. He lies down again, this time fully reclined, arms at his sides, boots still on. His horse is tethered nearby, eyes half shut, tail flicking softly. The courier doesn't speak. He doesn't move. But his position says clearly now is not travel. Now is transition. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. How formalized were these rest rituals? Some scholars argue they were military discipline in disguise, habits enforced by command. Others believe they were cultural instincts, born of nomadic life and refined by imperial necessity. Either way, these pauses weren't improvisations. They were expected, protected. You ease onto the mat beside him, not close, just aligned. The felt is warm. The saddle is within reach. Your pouch lies under your hand, not gripped, not guarded, just there. This is your journey-style immersion. You close your eyes, not to sleep, but to dwell, to rest like someone who knows exactly when they'll rise, exactly how far to the next post, exactly which stream will be half frozen by morning. And for now, all you need to do is remain outside. The stars bloom slowly, familiar, wide, and uncrowded. Inside, the fire burns low, and the message still safe, still sealed, still perfectly happy to wait. The sky outside has faded into its deepest ink. No more colors, just that wide, uninterrupted dark that seems to settle over the land like a wool blanket pulled by a careful hand. Inside the yurt, the courier sleeps lightly, breath even, arms folded across his chest, one boot heel twitching now and then in dreams. The only sound is soft chewing. His horse is awake, calm, and unconcerned. It chews without urgency, just enough to stay warm, just enough to stay here. You stay awake with it, not because you must, but because the moment holds. Soon, there will be tea again, but not for taste, for warmth and weight. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mongol relay stations provided couriers with simple but highly functional meals: fermented mare's milk, dried meat, hard cheese, and compressed tea. The tea was not just a drink, it was fuel, hydration, and ceremony. Boiled in animal fat or broth, it provided energy without jitter, warmth without clouding the mind. It was often drunk in silence, not in haste, but as intermission. A young station attendant enters the yurt now with a small pot cradled in one sleeve and two flat bowls held together with a leather strap. She kneels and sets them down without sound. The fire is coaxed slightly higher. Steam curls from the lip of the pot, thicker than water, thinner than soup. The courier sits up slowly, doesn't thank her aloud, just nods. Fringe details some courier tea recipes, included herbs like wild thyme or crushed dried berries, not for flavor, but for digestion and circulation. The warmth helped messengers nap in short intervals without chills. Some said the scent alone could tell them how far they were from their home station. The courier hands you a bowl. It's warm, round, and heavier than expected. Inside, a rich, oily liquid with the sheen of boiled tallow. Not much flavor, but deeply calming. You sip. The effect isn't sharp or energizing. It grounds you, like being gently pulled back into your body after floating just a little too far above it. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. Were these foods chosen purely for endurance? Or was there a cultural preference for slow-burning meals? Some historians argue that the choices were engineered for fuel. Others suggest these were traditional comfort foods of the steppe, adapted, not invented. But all agree nothing was wasted, and no part of the meal rushed digestion. This is your journey style immersion. You sip the tea again, slower this time. The warmth spreads, not like a fire, like a blanket. The courier dips a strip of dried meat into his bowl, chews once, then lays back down, not full, not hungry, just ready again. You feel it too. The road still exists, but it's not calling. Not yet. You roll onto your side. The saddle is nearby. The horse is fed, and the tea, still warm in your stomach, feels like a message written to your bones. It says, "Not yet. Rest," and you listen. The yurt's interior dims again, not from a candle being extinguished, but from the fire simply burning down the way it was meant to. Nothing abrupt, nothing lost, just a slow fade into evening's deeper stillness. The courier sleeps again, hand resting near the saddlebag. You sit, tracing the edge of your tea bowl with one finger. There's no conversation, only quiet readiness. Across the tent, near a rolled mat, lies something peculiar, a folded cloth marked with small ridges, bumps, and faint impressions, and not a map exactly, but close. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mongol couriers did not rely on detailed parchment maps for navigation. The landscape itself, its ridges, rivers, valleys, and stars, was the map. Most directions were remembered through terrain familiarity, reinforced by stories, seasonal cues, and memorized sequences. Roads were felt, not read. The courier stirs and unfolds the cloth. It's stitched with uneven lines, like a child's drawing, some sewn straight, some curved. Each line corresponds to a known path, a valley, or a ridge crossing. Raised knots mark river bends, smooth silk patches signal open grassland. You realize this is not for route planning, it's for recall. Fringe detail some messengers carried tactile route cloths like these, not to consult while riding, but to feel before sleeping. Tracing paths with their fingers helped them visualize the next day's ride, while their minds drifted off. It was a blend of memory and meditation, tactile, intimate, and quietly brilliant. He passes you the cloth. You run your hand along a ridge of knotted cord, two sharp turns, a dip, then a cluster of three dots, probably a small post, maybe a rocky stream. He doesn't explain. He doesn't need to. You trace it again, slower this time. Here's your scholarly uncertainty were these tactile maps, standardized or unique to each rider. There's debate. Some believe stations issued reusable versions. Others suggest messengers created their own, stitched or tied together from personal memory. Either way, they functioned more like lullabies than GPS familiar, gentle and grounding. This is your journey style immersion. You lie back now, the cloth resting on your chest. You close your eyes. The knots press lightly against your fingertips. You follow the trail in your mind. A straight line, a curve, a small ring that probably means a hill, a patch of smooth silk that must be the steppe. You're not riding, just remembering, and that is enough. The cloth is folded again, placed beneath the saddle. The fire flickers once, then settles low. Outside, a horse shifts and breathes. Inside, you do the same, and the road, knotted into thread and muscle memory, sleeps beside you, waiting, but never hurrying. Dawn doesn't break here. It seeps, There's no dramatic light spilling through the yurt flap, just a quiet shift in color, a cooling of the stars, a dimming of shadows inside the folds of blankets and along the ridge of the saddle. You stretch without sitting. The courier is already awake, brushing his horse with a stiff reed tool. Short strokes that sound like someone sweeping sand. No words, just readiness gathering itself without fanfare. The yurt is nearly empty now, tea bowl rinsed, saddle cinched. But there's one structure you hadn't noticed until now, a small lean-to beside the main post road, roofed with thatch, walls low, open to wind. You walk to it and feel immediately what it was built for. Stillness. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Mongol yam relay system included small rest huts or shelters spaced between major posts, rudimentary structures meant not for lodging, but for pausing. They provided windbreak, a place to change mounts, or to sleep briefly before moving on. Some were staffed, others were simply there, holding space for recovery. This one has no bedding, no fire, just a raised wooden platform, smooth from use, and an iron hook in the ceiling from which a lantern once hung. In the corner, a folded wool square, worn nearly flat. Someone slept here not long ago, or maybe someone always does. Fringe detail certain rest huts were built with sloped ceilings designed to minimize echo, so if a rider whispered to his horse or shifted his gear, the sound stayed low. Some huts had floor grooves worn from boots pacing in a set rhythm, 4 steps, turn, 4 steps back, not from anxiety, from routine. The courier enters and sits cross-legged on the platform, eyes closed, not meditating, not dozing, just waiting for his body to agree that it's time. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. How long were couriers encouraged to rest in these midpoints? Records differ. Some suggest precise intervals, marked by sun angle or bell chimes. Others imply complete autonomy, with riders trained to know when they were clear-minded enough to continue. The key wasn't urgency, it was readiness. This is your journey-style immersion. You sit beside him. The platform is warm from sun, but not hot. The wood smells of sweat, hide, and cedar oil. You lean against a beam, feeling how it gives just slightly, like a tree that remembers it once had leaves. A horse passes in the distance, another courier. Perhaps he doesn't stop, but you do. You close your eyes. The shelter does not demand silence. It offers it, and so you accept. The courier exhales, long and even. He stands. You stay seated a moment longer, letting your breath follow his, one in, one out. No urgency. The road hasn't moved, but your body has. The platform's warmth has faded slightly now, enough to remind you that time has moved, even if nothing else has. The courier steps outside the rest hut. His horse flicks its tail once, then stills again. Head lowered. You join him, boots pressing soft divots into the flattened grass path. He scans the horizon, not like someone searching, more like someone listening, not to voices, to wind. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mongol couriers relied on sensory cues far beyond what we'd consider directional. Before resuming a ride or deciding whether to pause, they would assess wind speed, the movement of birds, scent patterns, and even the echo of hoofbeats in distant air. These weren't superstitions, they were tools. You don't race into a headwind. You don't start uphill if birds are flying low. You wait. You align. The courier crouches and presses 2 fingers to the ground, not checking the soil, feeling for vibration. A way of asking is someone else riding near nothing. He nods, not to you, to himself, and sits back down. Fringe details some messengers carried tiny leather tassels or feather bundles clipped to their horse's mane. The way they blew in the wind told the rider more than flags ever could. A twitch meant tailwind, a flutter meant crosswind. No motion at all, time to wait. He reaches into his bag and pulls out a sliver of dried root. He chews slowly, eyes still on the grassland. You follow his gaze. There's movement, yes, but not of people, just the long, low sweep of wind bending the top layer of dry stalks. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. Did couriers receive formal training in these observational methods? Or were they learned entirely on the road? Some scholars argue for structured preparation, lessons from veteran riders. Others believe these were absorbed gradually, through exposure. The truth probably lies between practice formalized by intuition. You crouch now, too, feeling the breeze curl past your face. It doesn't press, it asks, not if you're ready to go, but whether you're awake enough to notice. This is your journey-style immersion. You let your hand trail through the grass. It tickles lightly at your fingertips, soft and cool. A hawk circles far above, barely flapping. The courier sees it too. Neither of you speak. He stands and stretches, not dramatically, just long enough to feel his back realign with the road ahead. Then he sits again, and you realize there's no such thing as wasting time out here. There's only choosing the right moment, and if that moment isn't now, you wait with the wind. The day settles into its own rhythm now, not forward or backward, just steady. The wind has shifted ever so slightly, and with it, the courier rises. He moves like someone uncoiling, not with energy, but with clarity. His boots press lightly into the dirt. His horse, sensing the change, lifts its head and shakes once. No bridle yet, no commands, just a quiet agreement. But he doesn't mount. He kneels beside the saddle, unfolds a wool cloth, and pulls out a small object, rounded, hand-sized, wrapped in linen. He sets it on a flat stone. This is not a relic. It's a reminder. Because sometimes rest is the message. Here's your mainstream historical fact in the Mongol Empire's relay system. Couriers didn't only carry orders or declarations, they were entrusted with symbols and small tokens, objects, or coded items meant not to be read, but recognized. Delivering these safely required precision and care, and in many cases, a deliberate pause before arrival, a moment to recenter. The courier unwraps the bundle. Inside a carved wooden knot, interwoven loops, no clear start, no end. You've seen similar symbols before on saddle buckles and temple gates, but this one has scratches across its edges, marks from travel, or perhaps from being held over and over while waiting. Fringe details some messengers were instructed to stop for a full hour at a designated post before completing their journey, not to rest their horse, but to reflect. It was believed that haste clouded memory, that a rider who rushed into a camp might forget a name, a tone, a caution, but a rider who rested first arrived in balance. The courier doesn't look at the token, he just touches it, palm down, breath even. Then he wraps it again and puts it away. Here's your scholarly uncertainty were these rests codified in training, or personal choice passed between riders. Some scholars suggest that the final relay stop was intentionally placed several kilometers outside the capital for this very purpose. Others argue the pause was cultural, a practice rooted in nomadic philosophies of pacing. Either way, it mattered. This is your journey style immersion. You sit beside the stone where the token rested. You feel the heat it left behind. Not much, but real. The linen is still warm in your lap. The knot rests in your memory now, not your hand. The courier finishes tightening his saddle straps, not quickly, but with steady certainty. His horse remains still, tail flicking once, then going quiet. He looks at the horizon, not to chase it, to meet it. You don't rise yet. You remain seated, because what you're learning, slowly, steadily, is that some journeys aren't about getting there. They're about pausing long enough to carry the weight with calm. And that may be the only way the message arrives intact. The sun is overhead now, bright, but not hot. It hovers in that middle place where shadows shorten and distance sharpens. You're walking with the courier now, not mounted, not rushed. The horse steps calmly beside him, reins draped loose over one hand. They're not in a hurry, just transitioning. Ahead, a second rider appears, not from the horizon, but from behind a ridge, emerging slowly, without dust, without sound. His horse moves with the same calm gait, and his saddle bears the same scuffed curves, the same neatly tied bedroll. You don't see a sword, you don't see armor, you see a second courier, and the exchange begins. But it will take some time. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Handoffs in the Mongol yam system were efficient, but quiet. Messages were passed between riders who might not know each other's names. There were no lengthy instructions, no ceremonial speeches, just a pause, a glance, and a shift of weight as one rested and the other began. The goal was not speed in the exchange. It was seamlessness. The two couriers stop a few paces apart. One dismounts, the other does not. They nod. The first unties a leather pouch, not the main one, a smaller packet wrapped in twine and reinforced with waxed cloth. He holds it out with both hands, palms up. The second takes it, inspects the twine, not for damage, but for familiarity. There's a knot tied in a way only his station uses. That tells him everything. Fringe detail some stations tied unique knots into message cords, tight loops, figure eights, or double coils, so that receiving riders could confirm the message's origin at a glance. The knot wasn't security, it was continuity, and it often replaced a written signature. They don't speak, not because they're avoiding conversation, because there's nothing that needs saying. Here's your scholarly uncertainty were these handoff rituals enforced across the empire, or did they vary by region? Some scholars suggest strong standardization, part of the Yam's famous discipline. Others believe couriers developed their own subtle codes, shared glances, gestures, or touch points passed from senior to junior rider. What is certain, the silence wasn't emptiness. It was efficiency. This is your journey style immersion. You stand to the side, watching. The first rider finishes the transfer, steps back, and removes a wool scarf from around his neck. He hands it to the second rider, not as a gift, but as an environmental update. Cold winds ahead. He doesn't explain. The other simply nods and ties it loosely to his saddlebag. The second courier mounts, adjusts his pouch, glances once at the sun, once at the horizon, and rides, not fast, just forward. The first remains, exhaling through his nose, like someone setting down a thought. Then he kneels, pours water from his flask into a shallow cup, and drinks in 3 quiet sips. He doesn't look relieved. He looks cleared. And you, standing there, begin to understand that a good message isn't just delivered, it's relayed with trust, with care, and with the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. The second rider disappears over the ridge with the quiet inevitability of wind changing direction. No flourish, no backward glance, just a horse, a pouch, and a message continuing on without urgency. The first courier, your courier, doesn't follow. He doesn't watch. He just sits again, back against a tree root twisted halfway out of the ground, boots planted, one hand resting lightly on his saddle. The handoff is complete. Now comes the warm coat and the winter route. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Mongol courier system functioned year-round, across steppes, deserts, and snow-covered mountains in winter. Riders prepared with fur-lined garments, wool-wrapped boots, and layers designed to trap warmth without sacrificing mobility. They carried fire starters, compact food rations that wouldn't freeze, and thick cloaks that doubled as bedding. Riders sometimes traveled for days without speaking to another soul, but they stayed warm, and they slept wherever the horse stopped. The courier reaches into his pack and pulls out a fur cloak, fox, from the look of it, with the edges slightly blackened from campfire ash. He shakes it once, lifts it overhead, and lets it fall across his shoulders like muscle memory. Then, without fanfare, he lies back and rests against the saddle again, not to sleep this time, to sink. Fringe details some riders wore hollowed-out amulets filled with coarse salt or fat. If stranded in deep snow, they would melt the contents for energy. Others kept rabbit fur wrist wraps, believing that warming the pulse points preserved alertness even in sub-zero air. But most relied on posture, how to tuck the knees, how to cross the arms, to retain warmth without interrupting breath. Snow begins to fall, just a few slow flakes drifting sideways across the low slope. The courier watches one land on the nose of his horse, which doesn't flinch. Another lands on the courier's eyebrow. He blinks once, that's all. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. Did riders plan for snow as part of their route, or adapt as they went? Some historians suggest winter maps were built into station timing. Others believe couriers learned weather patterns by smell and wind, choosing rest times and ridge lines based on the sound of snow against their sleeves. The truth is, as usual, is probably both. You sit near the base of a stone outcrop, cloak pulled tighter. The air isn't painful, it's present. The kind of cold that makes every heartbeat noticeable, but not fast. This is your journey-style immersion. The courier hands you a second cloak. No words, just weight. You wrap yourself, pulling it close around the ankles first, then up behind your neck. He nods once, lies back again, and closes his eyes, not as retreat, but as an integration. The horse shifts its legs, tucks them, then lowers itself into a seated rest. Not asleep, but breathing in sync. You're not in motion, but you're moving. through something quieter than weather and deeper than nightfall, and the snow doesn't demand your attention, it just welcomes you. The snow deepens with time, but not with drama. It doesn't rush. It accumulates the way dust does on old fabric, soft, quiet, and inevitable. The wind rises only slightly, just enough to remind you where you are. The courier shifts once under his fox-lined cloak, then stills again. His breath is visible now, slow plumes that vanish without effort. And yet, his horse is standing again, not restless, just ready. You realize what's happening. He's going to ride, and maybe sleep. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mongol messengers were trained to nap lightly while on horseback, especially between relay posts where terrain was flat and familiar. These weren't deep, dream-filled sleeps. They were measured, practiced dozes, eyes closed, spine aligned, reins looped loosely but not abandoned. The horse was trusted to follow the road. The body was trained not to fall. The courier tightens the last strap of his saddle, throws a thick felt pad over it, and mounts in one slow, even motion. His shoulders stay rounded, not tense. His legs hang loose. The horse starts forward with almost no signal. It knows this stretch, knows this speed. He leans forward slightly, chin low, hands folded across the horn of the saddle, and he closes his eyes. Fringe detail some riders braided thin bells or feather tufts into their saddle straps, not to make noise, but to feel motion. If a bell stopped moving, or a feather stilled against the wind, it meant the horse had paused. The rider didn't have to look. He could feel stillness and wake. You mount your own horse. It's smaller than you expected, but strong. It waits for you to settle your weight. Then it begins walking, not fast, just enough for your bones to sway gently in rhythm with its steps. This is not galloping. This is carrying. Here's your scholarly uncertainty how common was sleep riding in the Mongol yam system. Some suggest it was rare and used only by veteran couriers. Others argue it was widespread, especially on long stretches of safe, open land. No formal record confirms it, but the repeated mention of riders waking at posts, not before, implies something more than just stamina. You loosen your grip on the reins. Let your hands rest on the pommel. Your horse follows the other. No roads to choose from, no turns to take. Just a path that's been ridden for decades, etched into earth and hoofprint. This is your journey-style immersion. Your eyelids fall. Not completely, just enough to blur the line between horizon and memory. You hear the horse's breath, feel the creak of leather, and the crunch of snow beneath hooves, regular, unhurried. The wind whistles once through your collar. You let it. The reins are looped. The saddle holds you, like a question answered softly. And somewhere, several steps ahead, the courier sleeps too, upright, moving, alive in rhythm, not away from something, but toward continuance. The rhythm continues for longer than you measure, not in miles, not in minutes, just in the steady creak of saddle leather and the muffled beat of hooves through thin snow. It's not enough snow to cover the road, just enough to remind you that you're being carried through it. The courier ahead of you hasn't moved much. He's still upright, still swaying faintly with the pace of his horse. But now and then, he lifts his head slightly, listens to something, or senses a shift in the wind, and adjusts the reins by no more than a finger's width. He's not unconscious. He's in that space just above sleep. the place where memory settles. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Couriers often relied on subtle memory aids to maintain long distance accuracy. These weren't written scrolls or drawn maps, they were tactile cues embedded in their gear or worn on their person. Riders used charms, knots, and sound based reminders to ground themselves in the path ahead, even while resting in motion. You notice the courier's saddle has a tassel tied to the horn, a piece of woven cord ending in three tiny bells. They don't chime with every step, only when the wind shifts or when the gait changes. They aren't for decoration, they're alerts. Fringe details some couriers attached feathers or thin strips of rawhide to their saddle skirts. When they fluttered to the left, it meant crosswind. When they went still, it meant trees nearby, time to adjust pace. And some riders tied tiny knots into their own sleeves, each one marking a river crossed, a station passed, a message recalled. The knots were undone as memories were fulfilled. Your own horse walks evenly now, head low, ears relaxed. Its breath fogs out in time with yours. You feel a pouch at your waist shift slightly. Inside a piece of cloth you folded that morning. The corner has a knot in it. You don't remember tying it, but now that you feel it, you know what it means. You haven't forgotten. Here's your scholarly uncertainty: were these memory tricks standardized or invented rider by rider? Some suggest senior couriers trained younger ones with specific systems: 3 knots for north, 2 for west. Others believe it was entirely personal. A language of movement developed not in words, but in felt motion and repeated habit. This is your journey style immersion. Your head lowers slightly, not in exhaustion, in alignment. The horse keeps walking. You feel the bell at your saddle tremble once, then still. Your fingers rest on the pommel, where someone carved a notch years ago, maybe to count, maybe just to pass time. It fits your thumb perfectly, and in that groove, under a pale winter sky, you realize you're being moved by more than a horse. You're being held by memory, soft, simple, reliable, like sleep. The wind has quieted, the snow has thinned, the sky above you, though still pale, is turning the color of rubbed tin, flat, soft, almost translucent. The courier ahead has slowed his pace. His horse snorts once, not in protest, but in anticipation. You crest a small rise, and there it is, a final station, low-roofed, partially buried in snowdrift. Smoke rising from a side vent in a thin, upright column that vanishes into sky. One tether pole, one hay bundle, no guards, no noise, just pause. Because this moment is sacred. Here's your mainstream historical fact: the final rest station, before reaching a capital or major command post, was treated differently. Riders were required to stop, dismount, and recover before entering the city, not to delay delivery, but to ensure that the message arrived clear, unshaken, and correctly interpreted. Physical presence was part of communication, and weariness was not allowed to blur meaning. The courier dismounts. He doesn't speak. He pats his horse once on the flank, then removes the saddle slowly, laying it across a wooden stand that's seen hundreds of identical gestures. His movements are practiced, not tired. He ties the reins, then steps into the station, ducking slightly. You follow. Inside warmth, but dim, not the heat of hearth fire celebration, the steady, quiet warmth of neutral space. A pot of water sits on a clay stove. One bench, one rug, one folded cloak already waiting, perhaps left behind by another rider days ago, or weeks. Some fringe details. Some riders left small tokens at these final stations, not for luck, but for rhythm. A feather placed on a window ledge, a pebble from the last river crossing laid on a shelf. These objects weren't claimed, they were witnessed. A way of saying, someone paused here. You should too. The courier unwraps a dry cloth and begins cleaning his boots. Not because they're muddy, because this is where movement gets quieter. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. Were these final pauses spiritual, political, or logistical? Some say they were practical, a chance to review message details. Others suggest a ritual element, the belief that a messenger should arrive empty so the message could speak without distortion. Either way, these rest stops weren't optional, they were built in. This is your journey style immersion. You remove your cloak, not because you're too warm, but because it's part of entering a space like this. You set it down near the bench, touch the clay stove with your palm. The warmth is real. It waited for you, across from you. The courier leans back against the wall. He doesn't close his eyes, but his breathing shifts again. That familiar, even rhythm that says not done, but done enough. You sit with him. There's no need to plan your next move. The horse is fed. The message is ready. And in this space, carved into routine and warmed by repetition, you feel it. There's a stillness just before completion, and it belongs to you. The warmth in the relay station hums low and constant, like a breath that's been held for hours and finally let go. The courier finishes his tea. No gulp, no sigh, just the quiet tilt of a bowl and the faintest nod. His cloak has dried by now. The saddle outside is packed, but no one moves yet, because this is the last stillness, the one that doesn't prepare you for travel, but releases you from it. The room quiets even more, as if the very walls are leaning in to listen to the slow rhythm of breath. You've removed your boots, not out of etiquette, just because your feet asked to be forgotten for a little while. The clay stove glows faint orange, a color that asks for nothing. You sit across from the courier. He's awake, but no longer alert. His presence is wide now, softened, not like someone preparing to speak, but like someone who said what they needed to, long ago. The horse outside snorts once, then settles. You lean back, letting your shoulders press gently into the wall, the grain of the wood reminding your body that it can let go now. You listen to the warmth settle in your chest, low and quiet. Your hands rest on your lap, open, not because they're waiting, but because they're finished. And now, so are you. You've traveled with the message. You've paused when needed. You've read wind instead of words, snow instead of signs, and at every stage, you've learned rest was never the interruption, it was the point. So let your mind stop checking the horizon. Let your eyes slip shut, not in retreat, but in rhythm. Let your thoughts fold into themselves, like a saddle blanket smoothed by tired hands. Tonight, you sleep beside your horse, saddle near, boots off, message safe. No urgency, no command, only breath, only warmth, only a road that does not miss you when you rest, because it will still be there tomorrow. But tonight, you are still, and that is everything.